Hi, my name is Elizabeth Bloxberg, and on March 14th of 2019, I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. I have kind of a long history with cancer. 10 days after I was born, my mom was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She passed away 4 months later. They gave her 2 years to live, and she made it 4 months. They had not started doing bone marrow transplants, which is what they do now, and they actually started 2 years after she was diagnosed. So then when I was 2, my dad noticed that I had a lump in my neck. I'd been born with a cyst under my tongue, so he thought that that's what it was. It turns out that I was at 2 diagnosed with adenocarcinoma of the submandibular salivary gland. I believe I was the first child or one of the first children to be diagnosed with that type of cancer. It's way more common in adults. I then at 25 had a basal cell removed from my face. So I joke that I've had cancer about 2.5 times because a basal cell, it's technically skin cancer, but it's cancer-ish. So, but yeah, when I was a kid, I only had to have surgery. And then with this most recent, obviously it was stage 4. I did chemo, I did surgery, and on July 1st, I will be 5 years cancer-free. So I always sort of had stomach issues. My sister and I, whether it was lactose intolerance or whatever, we'd get stomach aches. And very commonly for us, we would eat something and then we would almost immediately go to the bathroom. It was just something that we always sort of did, and I didn't really pay that much attention to it because I tested negative for celiac multiple times. I went to a GI in my early 20s when I moved to LA, and I tested negative for celiac twice. They give you an IBS diagnosis, which is just a very blanket diagnosis of any sort of stomach issues. I then started to get really bad stomach issues later in my 20s and into my 30s. So I went and saw a GI because I was having trouble finishing going to the bathroom. I would go to the bathroom and I would feel like there was more that needed to come out, but I would have to sit and wait for a little bit for it to come out. So I went to see a GI, and he was very nice, and he did an exam and he said, everything seems fine, but I'd like to do a colonoscopy to rule out Crohn's or colitis. And then he also did a bacterial overgrowth test. So I got a call from my insurance that said that he was leaving the network the next week and that I would have to find a different GI to do the colonoscopy. So I got a new referral to another GI. He was in the same building, actually the same office as the previous GI. And I went and I saw this man, and he looked at everything that the previous GI had done. And he said, you have IBS with bacterial overgrowth, because I tested positive for SIBO. March 1st of 2019, I was at work. It was a Friday evening. I will never forget it. And I was standing in front of the house that we were going to film in front of. And I felt like I had pulled a muscle in my side. And I remember saying to one of my friends at work, like, it feels weird because I didn't do anything that would have caused that feeling. And I Googled my symptoms, and Google told me that I had gas. And my sister later joked that I'm the only person that the internet did not tell that they had cancer. And so from March 1st on, I started getting shooting pains from my left side towards my middle, and they would become more frequent and more painful as the weeks went on. On March 11th, I was at work and I started to just feel ill as well. So on the 12th, I went in to meet a very lovely man, and he was doing all these different tests, and he noticed that my blood work from January from my physical was that I had very low B12 and very low albumin, and nobody had followed up to do additional testing. I didn't have my chart at the time, so once I had my chart, I could see that the doctor had noted that they were low, but nobody followed up with me. So then I went So I was talking to the GI and he said, we're just going to run some tests. I would like to do a colonoscopy. You probably have a mild Crohn's or colitis. So the same thing that everyone else sort of thought was or wasn't what I had. And so I said, okay, well, I have a month left of work. Is it possible to do it when that's done? And he said, oh yeah, of course, no problem. And I said, as long as it's not life threatening. And he said, oh no, nothing like that. So I left the office. They had done some more blood work. I woke up the next day, again, pre-COVID. So I woke up in the most pain I'd ever been in. And I drove 35 miles to Santa Clarita to go to work. I was in so much pain that I could not stand up straight. Everyone at work was like, you have to go home. So I started to drive home. My doctor called me and he said the inflammation levels in my blood were so high. This was a Wednesday. He's like, you have to have a colonoscopy on Friday. And I said, that's fine because I'm in so much pain I can't go to work anyway. I was talking to my parents and my dad, who's a pediatrician, my dad's a doctor. He makes sure that everybody knows that every doctor knows that my dad is a doctor. And every time he'd be like, do they know I'm a doctor? They'd be like, yes, we know you're. It's very sweet. But so my dad decided he was going to fly down because of how much pain I was in. So my GI initially had told me to start taking fiber on that Tuesday. And then on Wednesday when he called me, he said, don't take fiber, switch to Miralax. So I switched to Miralax. My first bowel movement post Miralax on that Thursday was covered in blood. And it was the first time I had ever had blood in my stool. So I reached out to him and he said, that's perfectly normal. It's what we would expect because of the levels of inflammation in your blood. I wouldn't worry about it. He said, however, I think he and my dad had spoken on the phone and they decided they were going to send me for a CT test. So that Thursday, March 14th, I drove to UCLA to have my CT exam. My doctor called and he said, oh, you're driving. I'll call you back later. And I was in so much pain and so nauseous that I couldn't really, I knew it wasn't great, but I also it wasn't, I couldn't process what was happening. I don't know what my dad must have been thinking. And so we drove home. I had to sit in my car in the parking spot for about 15 minutes with the air conditioning blasting because I thought I was going to throw up. We finally made it in. I immediately ran into the bathroom and started throwing up. So I'm throwing up all the barium that I'd been drinking. And then my dad walked in with my cell phone on speakerphone because my doctor had called back. And my doctor said, so I'm literally sitting on the floor of my bathroom having just thrown up in the toilet. And my dad walks in with the phone on speakerphone and the doctor says, I'm so sorry, but you have a tumor in your colon and spots on your liver and you have to go to the hospital. And my dad whispered, it's happening all over again because my mom had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma of the bowel. So it wasn't connected through cancer, but it was in the roughly same location. So when he said I had liver spots, my first thought was, oh, I'm going to die. I'm dying. And I just was like, I can't, what? It just didn't make any sense. And then my doctor called me back because oftentimes you have to go through the emergency room to get admitted. He was able to get me a bed. So he said, okay, just go to UCLA. So I started what do you pack to go to the I just started packing. I remember having conversations with myself and I was just sort of going through all of the things that I'd done. I've traveled a lot. I've been to all 7 continents. I've just sort of kept going through everything of you've had a really good life. I was just kind of going through everything. When we get to UCLA, and one of the very lovely things is that they have valet. So I valeted my car and I went inside and they went through all the things and then they went to bring me upstairs. So the next morning they brought me in for the colonoscopy. They initially, which I think happens to a lot of people, is that if you have a blockage in your colon, no matter what stage you're at, if it's bad enough, they'll do an emergency surgery and just take out the colon, that part of the colon right away. They were able to place a stent. So because if you have surgery, you have to wait at least a month before you start chemo. So with a lot of people, they want to start chemo right away. So it changed every day. People would come in and everything would change. The large group, because it's UCLA, it's a teaching hospital, a large group of the colon team would come in. And I remember this one guy, I don't know if he was a med student or what he was, but he just walks in and just looks at me and goes, "Can you tell me what you think is going on?" And I'm like, "No, dude, you tell me. What do you mean?" And so they were able to do the colonoscopy. They placed the stent. And the next day I met other than my GI, I love a lot of these people, but someone who was very special to me ended up being my liver surgeon. And his name is Dr. Agopian at UCLA. And he walked into my room by himself and he sat down at the screen. He turned it to face me. He pulled up my scan and he said I had 3 spots on the left side of my liver and 1 on the right. So this beautiful man, I love him so much, walks into my room, sits down, turns around, shows me on the screen and says, "I want to take out the whole left side of your liver. And this spot on the right, it's right on the edge. We'll just cut it out. It's really easy. Don't worry about it." And then he looked at me and he said, "Let's cure this thing." And I looked at him and I said, "You can do that?" And he said, "We can try." And I was like, no one has said that to me yet. I'd been in the hospital for like 4 days at that point. And I was just looking at him and I said, "What's the plan?" And he said, "Well, we'll do a few rounds of chemo. And then if it's the same or better, you can have surgery." And I just went, okay. Like, he was the first person that sat down and explained things in a way that was like practical and like a plan. I email him every anniversary. I have an appointment to see him after the first to go back. Like, you always have to find those certain people, especially like within your doctors, who everyone plays a different role. And he, for me, was like the light, like the beacon of hope that nobody else presented. And I held on to that so tightly because nobody was giving me anything else. And I just have always been so appreciative of like everything that he gave me in that moment because I didn't get that from anybody else. So my parents initially, because they live in Northern California, they were like, "Okay, well, you'll come up," because they knew the head of oncology at UCSF. And they're like, "Okay, well, you'll come up and do this at home." And I was like, "No, I'm not leaving my house. And also, if I go home to do this, my entire existence revolves around me being sick. Like, everything about my life is away from all of my things and my cat and like all these other things." And it was like, no. So they gave me a few different oncology names, a handful. My parents reached out to their friend at UCSF for referrals to UCLA as well. They came back with 2 of the same 3 names. And in sort of a very weird story, I picked one of them, and it was like a 2-week wait for an appointment. I think like maybe 10 days. And then I got a phone call a couple days later. There was like, again, everything happens very quickly and then very slowly. So I then got a phone call because my parents had left because it was going to be 10 days until I saw my oncologist. They were going to regroup and come back. And then I got a phone call one random morning that was like, "Can you come in today to meet with the oncologist?" And I was like, "No, like no one's here." And then they called back and they said, "Oh no, don't come meet the oncologist. We're going to switch you to a different oncologist." And I was like, "Okay, what?" And then the woman said to me, "Honey, don't worry about it. If you were my daughter, I would send you." My oncologist is the head of the colon cancer department or GI, whatever the department is. And it was great. It was fine. But again, there was like all this stress and stuff around it. So my sister and my parents flew down to go meet with my oncologist. And one of her friends had said it was really interesting because she was having conversations with one of her friends who was a doctor. And what the friend had said to her was, there's no reason not to have radical hope. So radical hope sort of became my thing. The statistic, I think, is it's 12 or 14% of stage 4 colon cancer patients are alive 5 years after their diagnosis. And that was a really sort of hard thing to deal with. And then I also struggled a lot because people kept saying things like, you're the strongest person I know. If anyone can beat it, you can. And every time someone would say that to me, I'd be like, oh, I'm definitely dying. Like, and also I said to my sister, I said, it's such a weird pressure. Because what if I die? Then have I let all these people down? Was I not as strong as they thought I was? People always intend to say the right things. For me, especially, I'm not a warrior. It's not a battle. I didn't sign up for this. I'm not a soldier. I'm on my couch watching Parks and Recreation, like trying not to throw up. Like it's this idea that you have to be this strong front to everybody. Like, I'm being strong and I'm fighting it and it's this and that. And it's like, no, we're tired. Like, we're tired and we're cranky and we're annoyed and like hot. I was so hot and people, very lovely people, kept sending me blankets. And I was like, I'm so hot. And one of the main oxaliplatin side effects is that you can't eat, drink, or touch anything cold. And I had a very high cold sensitivity. So I was always having to drink hot drinks, hot chocolate, hot apple cider, hot water and lemon. And the last thing that I wanted was to be wrapped up in a blanket, but I really appreciated everybody that sent them to me. But I think that's sort of the thing that people, in their best intentions, to me, just say, I'm so sorry, this sucks. Like, because there isn't really anything else to say. It sucks. All of it sucks. But like, anything else beyond that to me puts pressure on the cancer patient. I had incredible people that stepped up and came and took care of me. And there was so much good that I got to experience. I recently donated my hair. I did it when I was diagnosed also, because with colon cancer, with the main chemos, you don't lose your hair. But I was so overwhelmed with all of the love and the gifts and the things that were coming to me. And I was also really hot. So I donated my hair after my first round of chemo. And then 5 years later, I donated it again. And it just felt like it was a little overwhelming, all the things that I was getting. And so anytime that I felt like I could give back in any way, that was sort of something that was really important to me also. But yeah, I think that the experience of it, and I just kept saying, people are so nice to you when you have cancer. And a lot of people said, no, people are nice to you because you have cancer. I did 3 rounds of chemo. And then I did a scan. And there's a much longer story attached to it, but my oncologist had to take a leave of absence for a while. So he was gone for a lot of my treatment. So when I went in for my first round of chemo, I was sat next to a man who was a couple years older than me, and his colon cancer had spread to his, I believe it was his esophagus. And I was so scared and so unsure of what was coming and what to expect. And he was on his 5th round, and he sat there and walked me through everything that I could expect. He talked about the cold symptoms. He talked about, so it's called broken glass syndrome. If you eat or drink anything, and what you don't even realize is walking too quickly, the air that you inhale is too cold, and it can set off different things. I learned And he just sort of walked me through everything in such a gentle, sweet way. And the thing that he said to me that I have taken with me and I have shared with every single person that I have talked to about this, because a lot of people reach out on TikTok or on Instagram. I have many conversations with strangers who have just been diagnosed or have friends or family that have just been diagnosed. And I walk them through everything like he did for me. What he said was, on my good weeks, I go snowboarding. And so in my first round, when I was having my worst day and I felt like I couldn't do anything and I couldn't move and I felt so terrible, in my head, I just kept repeating, he went snowboarding. So I paged my nurse practitioner, who I love, and she answered the phone and she said, well, what is the problem? And I said, well, my scan results. And she said, oh yeah, no, they were great. And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, your colon tumor, you can't even really see it anymore. And all your spots shrank. And I was like, oh, okay. And she was like, yeah. And I said, okay, well, so then am I having surgery? And she's like, oh, well, that's up to your liver surgeon. So I called the liver surgeon's office, my doctor that I love. And they were like, oh, well, he's not back till Wednesday. And I go, but I'm scheduled to have chemo on Wednesday. And if I have that chemo, it'll delay when I can have surgery. And they were like, oh, well, that's up to your nurse practitioner, because they knew that my oncologist was gone. And I was like, oh, can you guys just... So they talked. And then I got a phone call back that said, you are going to have surgery. You're going to go meet on Friday with your liver and colon surgeon. And I said, great. I immediately called my friend who had offered, who lived in Hawaii, and I scheduled a flight to Hawaii that next day on Saturday, because I wanted to have a bikini vacation before they cut into my stomach. So I did the surgery on July 1st of 2019. And then 2 weeks later, I think, or a week later, I went in for my follow-up appointment. And my liver surgeon came in and he said, has anyone given you your pathology yet? And I said, no. And he said, it's all dead. And I said, what? And he said, the cancer cells in your tumors, they're all dead. And I just went, okay. And he's like, no, this like never happened. This like isn't a thing. And then he goes, you're in remission. And I was like, yeah, I don't know you. And I called my sister after and I was like, he says that I'm in remission, but it like didn't sink in and it didn't feel real. The whole thing was very strange. And then finally, when my oncologist came back and said, you know, they say NED, which is no evidence of disease. And it sort of could sink in a little bit more. But I think the important thing for me, which is when you're sick and you get on your plan, you have a structured plan of everything that you're doing. But the big thing that people don't sort of warn you about is that everyone's around you and it's very structured. And then once you finish, you don't have that anymore. And that to me is when my mental health tanked. I really struggled as my friends were starting to pass away from treatment. Being a stage 4 cancer patient who doesn't have cancer, but maybe it's Schrodinger's cancer, right? You don't know until the day you have the test, and the day you have the test, you know that day you didn't have cancer. So that can be very difficult. And as I started to have panic attacks, driving to work. I had to stop working on the show that I was working on because my mental health got so bad. And I had a panic attack so bad I couldn't drive for about 6 weeks. I didn't think I'd be able to work again. And I went through the process, which should be so much easier. It should have been so much easier. My primary care doctor at the time wouldn't prescribe me anti-anxiety meds. He wanted me to rule out anything medical. So I went through endocrinology, ENT, cardiology, neurology, I went and saw every doctor under the sun, but the problem is they were all specialty. I had a brain MRI to make sure I didn't have cancer in my brain. They come in, they do their test, and if it's not them, they just leave. So I was just constantly feeling abandoned by all of my doctors, and my primary care doctors just saying, well, we just have to keep seeing what this is going to be. And then finally, I made it through all the different doctors. I was feeling suicidal. I was really struggling. I was really upset that no one was sort of listening or paying attention, and feeling really guilty because I survived, but now I don't want to be here. But I did want to be here. I just didn't want to, I couldn't live the way that I was feeling. The way that my brain felt, I couldn't sustain that. And I felt like nobody was paying attention to anything other than their specialized thing. And so I had guilt on top of everything else. My brain just felt like it was fighting me all the time. And then I had a meeting with a psychiatrist who was just not even to do anything other than to prescribe me meds that I should have been given 6 weeks earlier. And within 2 weeks, it completely changed everything in my life. And I also now have a new primary care doctor who is lovely. But I think that one of the big things for me, and that's what I do with my TikToks, I created a TikTok account to spread awareness for colon cancer in young people, but also the idea of struggling with mental health after your cancer finishes, because nobody talks about it. There isn't as much support for that. There's support when you're going through it. I think that everyone's experiences are going to be different, but the fact that colon cancer is now the #1 cancer death for men 20 to 40, and it's the #1 cancer death for men and women combined 20 to 40, and we still aren't doing colonoscopies for people, I think that that's the big thing that needs to be addressed.